What happens when reporting your teacher's relationship with a student almost gets you charged with slander. I saw Mr. Garrett's car parked outside Lily Chen's apartment building at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night in late September, and I knew immediately that every suspicion I'd had for the past month was true. My name is Alex Brennan, and I'm 17 years old, a senior at Westfield Academy where Garrett taught advanced placement literature and coached the debate team that Lily captained. I'd been driving home from my job at the movie theater when I recognized his distinctive silver Lexus with the faculty parking permit still visible on the dashboard. I pulled over 3 blocks away and sat there with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to decide what to do with information that could destroy multiple lives but might save one that mattered. Lily was 16, a junior, brilliant and beautiful in the way that made teachers pay attention and students either admire or resent her. Garrett was 34, married with a 2-year-old daughter, and widely considered one of the best teachers in our competitive private school. He'd won teaching awards, published essays about pedagogy, and maintained a waiting list for his courses. Parents requested him specifically when enrolling their children. But I'd noticed things over the past month that had gradually built into a pattern too obvious to ignore. It started in early September, when school resumed after summer break. Lily had returned from a creative writing program at Yale, looking different, more confident and polished, wearing clothes that seemed more sophisticated than her usual style. She'd always been mature for her age, serious about academics, and ambitious about college, but something had shifted in her demeanor. She carried herself with a new kind of certainty that made her seem older than 16. Garrett had been her mentor for 2 years, helping her prepare for national debate competitions and offering guidance on her college application essays. They'd always been close in the way that gifted students and favorite teachers sometimes are, with long conversations after class and weekend meetings to work on debate strategies. Nobody thought anything of it because Garrett was professional, and Lily was focused entirely on academic success. Her parents were both doctors who worked constantly and seemed grateful that a dedicated teacher was providing the mentorship they couldn't offer. But when school started this fall, their dynamic had changed in subtle ways that bothered me, even though I couldn't articulate exactly why. Garrett's attention to Lily had become more intense and exclusive. In class, he'd call on her first for every discussion question, his eyes seeking her out before anyone else had a chance to raise their hands. When she spoke, he'd lean against his desk and watch her with an expression that seemed too focused, too personal for a teacher listening to a student's literary analysis. He'd make comments about her insight and intelligence that went beyond normal praise, describing her as extraordinary and mature beyond her years, saying she had the mind of a graduate student trapped in high school. After class, they'd talk in low voices by his desk while the rest of us packed our bags and left, their heads close together over whatever essay or debate brief they were discussing. I'd see them through the window as I walked past his classroom during free periods, sitting side by side at his desk, their body language suggesting an intimacy that crossed professional boundaries, even if nothing overtly inappropriate was happening. The first concrete evidence came during a debate tournament in mid-September. Our team had traveled to a competition at a private school 2 hours away, with Garrett supervising as coach. We'd finished our rounds by 4 p.m. and were supposed to caravan back together, but Garrett announced that Lily would be riding with him separately because they needed to discuss strategy for upcoming nationals. 3 other seniors on the debate team exchanged glances, but said nothing. We drove back in 2 parent-driven cars while Garrett and Lily took his Lexus. They arrived back at school 90 minutes after us, claiming they'd stopped to review video footage of Lily's performance on Garrett's laptop. Lily's hair was messier than it had been when we'd finished competing, and she had a coffee stain on her shirt that hadn't been there before. Garrett's explanation was plausible enough that nobody questioned it openly, but I saw the way my teammate Nicole looked at them with suspicion and discomfort. I started paying closer attention after that tournament. I noticed that Garrett frequently scheduled one-on-one meetings with Lily in his classroom after school, sessions that he claimed were for college essay revision or debate preparation. The classroom door would be closed despite school policy requiring teachers to keep doors open during individual student conferences. I'd walk past and see them sitting close together, Garrett's hand sometimes resting on the back of Lily's chair or on her shoulder. When other students needed help, Garrett would direct them to schedule appointments during his posted office hours, but Lily had unlimited access and could apparently just show up whenever she wanted. He'd rearrange his schedule to accommodate her, canceling meetings with other students or pushing back deadline extensions if Lily needed his time. The favoritism was blatant enough that other students in our AP Lit class started complaining about it, muttering that Lily was teacher's pet and speculating about why Garrett gave her so much attention and special treatment. Then came the text messages that Nicole showed me in late September. She'd been working on a group project with Lily and had borrowed her phone to look something up when a text from Garrett appeared on the lock screen. The preview was innocuous. Enough. Something about meeting to discuss Lily's Stanford application essay, but Nicole had been suspicious enough to screenshot it and show me. What bothered us wasn't the content, but the fact that Garrett was texting Lily on her personal phone at 9 p.m. on a Saturday night. Teachers at Westfield Academy were supposed to communicate with students only through official school email during reasonable hours, never through personal phones, and definitely not on weekends unless there was some kind of emergency. I suggested that maybe it was about an urgent deadline or competition issue, but Nicole shook her head and said she'd seen other messages earlier that week, casual conversations about books and movies that had nothing to do with school or debate. The boundary between teacher and student had eroded into something that resembled friendship, or possibly something worse. I went to our guidance counselor, Mrs. Deborah Franklin, with my concerns on a Monday morning in early October. I explained what I'd observed: the closed-door meetings, the excessive favoritism, the after-hours texting, the unusual amount of time they spent together outside normal academic contexts. Mrs. Franklin listened carefully and took notes, but her expression suggested she was skeptical about my interpretation of what I was describing. She asked if I'd witnessed anything explicitly inappropriate, any physical contact beyond what might be normal for a teacher-student mentorship, any conversations or behaviors that clearly crossed professional lines. I admitted I hadn't seen anything overtly sexual or heard any conversations that were undeniably inappropriate, just a pattern of boundary violations that made me uncomfortable. She reminded me that Garrett had an excellent reputation and that Lily was a gifted student who benefited from intensive mentoring. She suggested I might be misinterpreting a positive teacher-student relationship as something inappropriate because I didn't understand how advanced academic mentorship worked at elite levels. Mrs. Franklin's dismissal made me doubt myself for about a week. Maybe I was reading too much into a situation that was completely innocent. Maybe my own mediocre academic performance made me resentful of the attention Garrett gave to his star student. Maybe I was projecting inappropriate motives onto a dedicated teacher who was simply going above and beyond to help a talented student reach her potential. But then, I saw them at the coffee shop near school on a Sunday afternoon in mid-October. I'd gone there to study for an AP history exam, and I looked up from my textbook to see Garrett and Lily sitting at a corner table, leaning close and talking in low voices. Lily was wearing makeup and a dress that seemed too formal for casual weekend coffee, and Garrett was in jeans and a sweater instead of his usual teacher attire. They weren't discussing schoolwork. Lily was laughing at something Garrett said, her hand touching his arm, and he was looking at her with an expression that was unmistakably romantic. I took a photo with my phone before they noticed me, capturing the intimacy of their body language and the way they were looking at each other. I left the coffee shop immediately and drove home to think about what I should do with that photograph. The image clearly showed a teacher and student in what appeared to be a date situation, meeting secretly on a weekend in a social rather than academic context. But was a photo of them sitting together at a coffee shop enough evidence of an inappropriate relationship? They weren't touching in the photo, weren't kissing or holding hands, just sitting close and talking. A defense could argue they'd coincidentally ended up at the same coffee shop, or were discussing college applications in a more relaxed environment. I knew what I'd seen with my own eyes, the romantic energy between them. But I also knew that what I'd captured in the photo might not be enough to prove anything definitive. I decided to wait and gather more evidence before reporting anything to school administration. I needed something concrete that couldn't be explained away or dismissed as innocent mentorship between a dedicated teacher and a gifted student seeking guidance. The opportunity came 2 weeks later when I saw Garrett's car outside Lily's apartment building late at night. Her parents were both surgeons who frequently worked night shifts at the hospital, leaving Lily alone in the apartment for long stretches. I'd known her since middle school, and I knew her family situation well enough to understand that she often had the place to herself. Seeing Garrett's car parked on her street at 11 p.m. on a Thursday was evidence that couldn't be explained away as coincidental or academic. There was no legitimate reason for a teacher to be at a student's home that late at night, especially when her parents weren't there. I parked my car and watched for 40 minutes, taking time-stamped photos of Garrett's vehicle with the apartment building visible in the background. At 11:43 p.m., Garrett emerged from the building entrance, looked around cautiously, and walked quickly to his car. I captured that too, clear images showing him leaving the building late at night. He drove away, and I sat there processing what I'd documented. The next morning, I went directly to Principal Judith Carver's office before first period. I brought printed copies of all the photos, the coffee shop meeting, and the late-night apartment visit, along with written documentation of everything I'd observed over the past 6 weeks. Principal Carver was a stern woman in her 50s who'd been running Westfield Academy for 12 years, with an emphasis on academic excellence and strict adherence to behavioral codes. She listened to my presentation without interrupting, examining the photos carefully. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and was silent for a long moment. Then she asked me a question I hadn't expected. "Alex, do you have any personal conflicts with Mr. Garrett or Lily? Any reason you might want to damage their reputations?" I was stunned by the implication. I explained that I had nothing against either of them, that I was simply reporting what appeared to be a wildly inappropriate relationship between a teacher and student that violated every ethical and professional boundary that should exist in an educational setting. Principal Carver's expression remained neutral and professional. She said the photos showed nothing explicitly inappropriate, just a teacher and student at a coffee shop and a car parked near an apartment building. She acknowledged that the late-night timing was concerning, but noted that there could be innocent explanations. Maybe Garrett had been dropping off college recommendation letters or discussing a family emergency. Maybe the coffee shop meeting had been about crisis counseling or academic intervention. She promised to investigate my allegations thoroughly, but cautioned me about making accusations that could destroy careers and reputations without absolute proof of wrongdoing. She asked me not to discuss my concerns with other students or parents while the investigation was ongoing. I left her office feeling frustrated but hopeful that administration would take appropriate action to protect Lily from what I was increasingly certain was a predatory relationship disguised as mentorship. Nothing happened for 2 weeks. Garrett continued teaching his classes normally. Lily continued attending debate practice and excelling in her coursework. Their interactions seemed unchanged, still spending unusual amounts of time together, with closed doors and hushed conversations. I started to wonder if Principal Carver had actually investigated anything, or if she'd simply filed my report away and hoped I'd forget about it. Then, on a Wednesday morning in early November, I was called to Principal Carver's office during second period. When I arrived, I found not just Carver, but also the school's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Barbara Yang, and my parents, who'd been summoned from work without any explanation given to them. My stomach dropped as I realized this wasn't a meeting about the investigation's findings. This was something else entirely, something that felt hostile and adversarial from the moment I walked into the room. Barbara Yang introduced herself and explained that she was there representing Westfield Academy's legal interests. She said that my allegations against Mr. Garrett had been investigated thoroughly by Principal Carver and an independent consultant, and no evidence had been found to support claims of inappropriate conduct. Garrett had provided detailed explanations for every incident I'd reported. The coffee shop meeting had been a coincidental encounter where he'd offered pastoral guidance after Lily had texted him about feeling stressed. The late-night apartment visit had been to drop off books Lily needed for a research paper she was writing on a tight deadline. The closed-door meetings were for sensitive discussions about Lily's family situation and mental health concerns that required confidentiality. Every behavior I'd interpreted as evidence of an inappropriate relationship had a plausible, innocent explanation, and without any evidence of actual sexual or romantic contact, the school had concluded that Garrett had done nothing wrong. Then Barbara Yang delivered the real purpose of this meeting. She said that my unfounded accusations had caused serious damage to Mr. Garrett's reputation and professional standing. Other teachers were now treating him with suspicion. Parents had heard rumors and were questioning whether their daughters were safe in his classes. The school's reputation was being harmed by gossip and speculation stemming from my allegations. Garrett was considering legal action against me for slander and defamation. My parents, who'd been listening in shocked silence, both started talking at once, my father demanding to know what I'd allegedly done, and my mother asking how a student reporting concerns could possibly face legal consequences. Barbara Yang calmly explained that making false accusations that damage someone's reputation and livelihood constitutes defamation under state law. Since I was 17, I could be held legally liable for the harm my accusations had caused, and my parents could be held financially responsible for any damages awarded in a lawsuit. I tried to explain that I hadn't made false accusations, that I'd reported legitimate concerns based on observable behavior that violated professional boundaries. Principal Carver interrupted me with cold precision. You took photographs of a teacher without his knowledge or consent and used those photographs to construct a narrative of misconduct that our investigation found to be baseless. You've engaged in what amounts to stalking behavior and harassment of both a faculty member and a fellow student. These are serious violations of our code of conduct and potentially criminal acts. My mother demanded to see the investigation report, and Barbara Yang said it was confidential personnel information that couldn't be shared. My father asked if they'd interviewed other students who might have observed the same concerning behaviors, and Principal Carver said they'd spoken to relevant parties who'd all confirmed that Garrett maintained appropriate professional boundaries. The meeting felt surreal, a complete inversion of what I'd expected. I'd reported a teacher for potentially abusing a student, and somehow I was the one being threatened with legal action and school discipline. Barbara Yang presented me with a document she called a resolution agreement. If I signed it, I would formally retract my allegations against Mr. Garrett, apologize in writing for the harm my false accusations had caused, agree never to discuss the matter with other students or community members, and accept disciplinary probation for the remainder of the school year. In exchange, Mr. Garrett would agree not to pursue legal action against me for defamation. If I refused to sign, the school would proceed with formal disciplinary action that could include expulsion, and Garrett would be free to file a civil lawsuit seeking financial damages for harm to his reputation and emotional distress. My parents were given 15 minutes to consult with me privately in an adjacent conference room. My father was furious, convinced this was a cover-up, and threatening to hire an attorney to fight back. My mother was more pragmatic, worried about the financial and academic consequences of a protracted legal battle. I sat there feeling numb and disconnected, unable to process how reporting concerns about a teacher-student relationship had resulted in me being threatened and coerced into silence. I refused to sign the resolution agreement. My father supported that decision and immediately hired a family friend who practiced education law to represent me. Attorney David Novak reviewed all my documentation and the school's threatened actions, and his assessment was grim. He explained that defamation cases involving allegations of sexual misconduct are extremely difficult to defend because the burden of proof is on the person making the accusations. I would need concrete evidence of an actual sexual or romantic relationship between Garrett and Lily, not just suspicious behaviors and boundary violations. Without explicit proof, a court would likely find that my accusations damaged Garrett's reputation without sufficient factual basis, which meets the legal definition of defamation. Even if I genuinely believed the relationship was inappropriate, that wouldn't protect me from liability if I couldn't prove it was true. David advised me to consider signing the resolution agreement to avoid the substantial financial risk of a defamation lawsuit and the academic consequences of expulsion from Westfield Academy. But I couldn't let it go. I couldn't sign a document saying I'd made false accusations when I knew in my gut that something wrong was happening between Garrett and Lily. I started trying to find other students who'd noticed the same red flags I had, who might be willing to speak up and corroborate my concerns. Nicole agreed to meet with me and my attorney, and she described the inappropriate text messages she'd seen and the way Garrett's favoritism toward Lily had become impossible to ignore. But when David Novak asked if she'd be willing to give a formal statement or testify if necessary, Nicole backed off immediately. Her parents had heard about my situation and had explicitly forbidden her from getting involved in any way. They didn't want their daughter dragged into a legal mess that could affect her own college applications and future. She apologized, but said she had to protect herself and her family's interests. I understood, but felt increasingly isolated and alone in seeing what seemed obvious to me. I tried talking to Lily directly, catching her alone in the school library during a free period in mid-November. I asked her straight out if something inappropriate was going on between her and Garrett, if he'd crossed boundaries or made her uncomfortable in any way. Lily's reaction was immediate and defensive. She told me I was out of line and had no right to make accusations about her personal life or professional relationships. She said Garrett was an incredible mentor who'd helped her more than any teacher she'd ever had, that he'd supported her through difficult family situations and pushed her to reach her full potential. She accused me of being jealous of her success and trying to destroy a good teacher's career because I resented the attention and opportunities she'd earned through hard work. Her anger seemed genuine, and for a moment I questioned everything again. Maybe she really did see their relationship as purely mentoring. Maybe she was too young and naive to recognize that Garrett's behavior was grooming and manipulation. Or maybe I was completely wrong about the entire situation and projecting malicious intent onto innocent interactions. The disciplinary hearing happened 3 weeks later in early December. The school's review board consisted of Principal Carver, 2 senior teachers, and a parent representative. They'd reviewed my attorney's submission of evidence and arguments, and they'd conducted their own additional investigation into my allegations. The hearing lasted 4 hours and felt more like a trial than a school disciplinary proceeding. Barbara Yang presented the school's case against me, arguing that I'd engaged in harassment and stalking of both a teacher and student, that I'd violated school policies against recording others without consent, and that I'd made serious accusations without sufficient evidence to support them. She called witnesses including several of Garrett's colleagues who testified about his professional reputation and the harm my allegations had caused to his standing in the school community. One of Lily's friends testified that Lily had been upset and distressed by my obsessive interest in her private life and my refusal to accept her statements that nothing inappropriate was happening. My attorney, David Novak, presented my evidence and argued that I'd been acting in good faith to report legitimate concerns about a teacher's conduct. He emphasized that students have a right and even a responsibility to report situations that make them uncomfortable or appear to violate professional boundaries. He argued that threatening me with legal action for making a good faith report would have a chilling effect on student willingness to come forward about genuine misconduct in the future. But without being able to present concrete proof of an actual inappropriate relationship, David's arguments felt hollow and legalistic. The review board deliberated for 90 minutes before announcing their decision. I was found to have violated school conduct codes through harassment and making unfounded accusations against a faculty member. I was suspended for 2 weeks and placed on disciplinary probation through the end of the school year. Any further violations would result in immediate expulsion. Additionally, I was required to write a formal apology to Mr. Garrett and to Lily for the harm my actions had caused them. The suspension meant I'd miss important college application deadlines and fall behind in my coursework during a critical period. My parents hired a tutor to help me keep up with assignments while I was out of school. During those 2 weeks at home, I had a lot of time to think about what had gone wrong and why my attempts to help had backfired so completely. Part of the problem was that I'd misunderstood how institutions protect themselves. Schools like Westfield Academy have powerful incentives to avoid scandal and maintain their reputations. Acknowledging that a beloved teacher was engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a student would invite media attention, potential lawsuits from other families, and damage to the school's prestigious brand. It was much easier and safer to discredit the whistleblower and frame me as a troubled student making false accusations than to investigate a respected faculty member and risk uncovering something that would require public action. I returned to school in January bitter and angry, but committed to keeping my head down and finishing the year without further incident. Garrett was still teaching and seemed more confident than ever, his reputation rehabilitated by the school's investigation clearing him of wrongdoing. Lily was thriving academically and had won a major national debate championship over winter break. They continued their intensive mentoring relationship with the school's full blessing and approval. Nobody wanted to hear my concerns or consider that maybe the investigation had been inadequate or deliberately superficial. I'd become the villain in the story, the student who'd tried to destroy a good teacher's career out of jealousy or malice. Other students avoided me, worried that associating with someone who'd been disciplined for harassment would reflect badly on them. My college applications suffered because several teachers who'd previously supported me suddenly became much less enthusiastic about writing recommendation letters for someone who'd caused such serious problems at the school. Then, in early March, everything changed. Lily stopped coming to school. The official explanation was that she'd taken a leave of absence for personal health reasons and would be completing her coursework remotely for the remainder of the term. Rumors started circulating immediately. Some students claimed she'd had a nervous breakdown from academic pressure. Others whispered that she'd gotten pregnant. A few people, who'd followed my situation more closely, wondered if something had finally happened with Garrett that the school couldn't ignore. I wanted to reach out to Lily, but knew that any contact would be seen as further harassment and would likely result in my immediate expulsion. I watched from a distance as the situation unfolded, with a growing sense that the truth I'd tried to expose was finally coming to light, but too late to prevent real harm. 2 weeks after Lily's sudden leave of absence, police showed up at school to speak with Principal Carver. Word spread quickly through the building that law enforcement was investigating something serious. Garrett was pulled out of his afternoon classes and escorted to the administrative offices. Students speculated wildly about what was happening, but no official information was released. That evening, my attorney David Novak called my parents with news. Lily's mother had discovered text messages on her daughter's phone that revealed an ongoing sexual relationship between Lily and Garrett that had started over the summer at the Yale writing program, where Garrett had been a guest instructor. The texts included explicit photos and detailed plans for secret meetings. Lily's mother had immediately contacted police and filed a report for statutory rape and sexual misconduct by a person in authority. The district attorney was building a criminal case against Garrett, and Westfield Academy was fully cooperating with the investigation after spending months denying and covering up the situation I'd tried to report. The vindication I'd expected to feel didn't come. Instead, I felt sick knowing that Lily had endured months of a predatory relationship that could have been stopped if the school had taken my initial report seriously. Garrett had continued grooming and exploiting her for an additional 5 months after I'd first raised concerns, all because administration had chosen to protect his reputation rather than investigate properly. The evidence I'd gathered, the photos and observations, had all pointed to exactly what was happening. But without explicit proof of sexual contact, the school had dismissed everything as innocent mentorship. Now there was explicit proof, and suddenly, everyone was outraged and demanding accountability. Parents were calling for Principal Carver's resignation. The school board was launching an independent investigation into why my allegations had been mishandled. Local media was covering the story, describing Garrett as a predator who'd hidden behind his professional reputation while sexually abusing a student. Garrett was arrested and charged with multiple felony counts including statutory rape, sexual misconduct, and exploitation of a minor. His attorney immediately began building a defense claiming the relationship had been consensual and that Lily had pursued him, but prosecutors emphasize that a 16-year-old cannot legally consent to a sexual relationship with an adult in a position of authority over her. The evidence from Lily's phone was damning and undeniable. Text messages showed Garrett had deliberately isolated Lily from peers and family, had convinced her that their relationship was special and mature, and had used his authority as her teacher and mentor to coerce her into sexual activity. He'd also explicitly instructed her to delete messages and hide evidence of their contact, demonstrating his awareness that what he was doing was wrong and illegal. The manipulation and grooming were textbook patterns of predatory behavior, exactly what I'd feared was happening based on the boundary violations I'd observed months earlier. Westfield Academy offered me a formal apology and rescinded all disciplinary actions taken against me. Principal Carver issued a statement acknowledging that the school had failed to properly investigate my initial report and had inappropriately threatened me with legal action for raising legitimate concerns. She announced new policies for handling allegations of teacher misconduct, including mandatory reporting to outside authorities and independent investigations of any claims involving potential abuse or exploitation. My attorney demanded more than an apology. David Novak filed a lawsuit against the school for retaliatory discipline, intimidation, and creating a hostile environment that enabled ongoing abuse of a student. He argued that the school's aggressive response to my whistleblowing had directly contributed to Lily suffering additional months of exploitation by Garrett. The lawsuit sought damages not just for harm to me, but also established that institutions have a legal and moral obligation to take seriously any student reports of potential misconduct, regardless of a teacher's reputation or standing. The case settled 8 months later for an undisclosed sum that included full payment of my college tuition and a requirement that Westfield Academy implement comprehensive reforms to their misconduct reporting and investigation procedures. Principal Carver resigned under pressure from parents and the board. Several administrators who'd been involved in dismissing my initial report were reassigned or terminated. The school hired an outside firm to review their handling of the Garrett situation and to identify systematic failures that had allowed a predator to operate with impunity. The report, when it was finally released, was devastating. It detailed multiple prior complaints about Garrett's inappropriate attention to female students that had been dismissed or mishandled over his 15-year tenure. I'd been just the latest in a series of students who'd tried to raise concerns about his behavior, only to be silenced or intimidated by an institution more interested in protecting its reputation than its students. Garrett's criminal trial took place the following year. Lily testified about how the relationship had started during the summer program, how Garrett had gradually escalated from mentorship to romantic interest to sexual contact, always framing everything as special and consensual while using his authority to manipulate her compliance. She described feeling confused about whether the relationship was appropriate, but trusting Garrett because he was an adult and authority figure who'd convinced her she was mature enough to handle a secret romance. Her testimony was heartbreaking and powerful. The jury convicted Garrett on all counts after just 3 hours of deliberation. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison with no possibility of early parole. His teaching credentials were permanently revoked. His wife divorced him and was granted full custody of their daughter with no visitation rights. He lost everything, which was appropriate justice for the harm he'd caused, but it didn't undo the damage to Lily's sense of self and trust in adults. Lily finished high school through an online program and deferred her college admission for a year to focus on therapy and recovery. She eventually attended Stanford and thrived academically, but she's been open about how Garrett's abuse affected her for years afterward. She gave a powerful interview to a local newspaper about grooming and institutional betrayal, describing how the school's failure to investigate my initial report had allowed her abuse to continue. She said that if administration had taken the concerns seriously when first raised, she might have been protected months earlier. Her willingness to speak publicly about her experience helped push broader reforms not just at Westfield Academy, but across the entire district. Multiple schools implemented mandatory training for teachers and administrators on recognizing grooming behaviors and properly investigating allegations of misconduct. The message was clear. Institutions had to prioritize student safety over reputation management. For me, the entire experience fundamentally changed how I understand power and institutional self-protection. I learned that doing the right thing doesn't guarantee good outcomes, that speaking up can result in severe personal consequences, and that institutions will often choose to attack whistleblowers rather than confront uncomfortable truths about their own failures. But I also learned that persistence matters, that documentation matters, and that sometimes you have to endure unjust retaliation because the alternative is silence and complicity. Other students reached out to me after the truth came out, sharing their own stories of trying to report misconduct and being dismissed or punished. We formed a network of young people committed to pushing for better systems and accountability when adults fail in their protective responsibilities. The vindication of being proven right was overshadowed by the knowledge of how much harm could have been prevented if the system had worked properly from the start. I think about Lily often and wonder if she's fully healed from what Garrett did to her. I know I carry my own scars from the experience of being threatened and punished for trying to help. The incident taught me that justice is often delayed and incomplete, that doing the right thing can cost you tremendously, but that the alternative is a world where predators operate with impunity because potential whistleblowers are too scared to speak up. Every time I hear about a student reporting misconduct and being dismissed or retaliated against, I'm reminded of how close Lily came to never getting justice because an institution prioritized its image over a teenager's safety. Schools need to understand that their first obligation is to students, not to teachers' reputations or institutional prestige. When they get that priority wrong, they become accomplices to abuse. 4 years later, I'm in college studying law and policy, focused on institutional accountability and whistleblower protection. Lily and I aren't close friends, but we stay in occasional contact and support each other's advocacy work. Garrett remains in prison where he belongs. Westfield Academy has new leadership and better policies, but I wonder how many other schools are still operating under the same broken system that nearly let a predator destroy a student's life. The fight for institutional accountability is ongoing and exhausting, but someone has to keep pushing. That's what I learned from nearly being charged with slander for reporting a teacher's sexual abuse of a student. Speaking truth to power is dangerous and costly, but silence is far worse. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.